You believe you know the story of the Crusades, don't you? You've seen the epic battles, heard the tales of valor and conquest, the grand clashes of faith and empire. And undoubtedly, you pinpoint 1291, the cataclysmic Fall of Acre, as the definitive end. The final chapter, the moment the curtain fell on the Frankish presence in the Holy Land. For centuries, this narrative has been cemented in your mind, a clear-cut conclusion to an era defined by religious fervor and brutal warfare. But what if we told you that the story you thought you knew was merely the prologue to an even more intricate, more unseen drama? Imagine for a moment that the history books, in their neat, conclusive fashion, have painted a simplified picture, a mere outline of a vibrant, violent, and vastly complex tapestry. You're about to peer through the cracks of that accepted narrative, into the shadows where power struggles continued, where empires clashed not just on the battlefield, but in the subtle maneuvers of diplomacy, economics, and espionage. The Fall of Acre was not an ending, but a profound shift, unleashing an unseen empire of conflicts that continued to shape the Holy Land for generations, far beyond the dramatic exit of the Crusaders. Forget the simple dichotomy of Crusader versus Saracen. You are about to discover a landscape teeming with diverse players, each vying for influence, survival, and dominance, in a region scorched by centuries of war, yet brimming with strategic importance. From the Grand Mamluk Sultanate, often seen as the undisputed victor, to the looming Mongol Ilkhanate, and the enduring, resilient local communities, the Holy Land was a geopolitical chessboard where every move had profound implications. You are about to navigate these uncharted waters, to uncover the hidden currents of power that truly defined the post-Acre era. Let your mind drift back to 1291. You stand on the crumbling walls of Acre, feeling the oppressive dust of siege and destruction. The city, the last major Crusader stronghold, falls to the relentless Mamluk forces. The cries of battle fade, replaced by the silence of annihilation. For the Latin West, this was a symbolic death knell, a crushing defeat that signaled the end of their grandiose ambitions in the Levant. You might visualize the last ships sailing away, carrying the tattered remnants of a dream, leaving behind a conquered land to its new masters. Yet this perceived finality was deeply misleading. While the Crusader states had indeed vanished, their influence, their economic ties, and the very memory of their presence did not simply evaporate. You must understand that the removal of one major player did not suddenly simplify the region. Instead, it created a vacuum, a reshuffling of alliances and antagonisms that plunged the Holy Land into a new, complex era of geopolitical maneuvering and often brutal internal strife. The stage was set for a different kind of conflict, one less about grand crusades and more about the gritty, relentless struggle for local and regional control. The Mamluks, having expelled the Franks, certainly presented an image of undisputed authority. You would see their banners flying high over Acre, their new fortifications rising, their decrees echoing through the newly subjugated lands. But look closer. Beneath this veneer of singular dominance lay a volatile reality. The Mamluk Sultanate itself was a dynamic, often brutal political entity, forged by warrior slaves and perpetually on the knife edge of internal power struggles. Their control, while extensive, was constantly challenged, forcing you to reconsider any notion of a peaceful, unified aftermath. Consider the Mamluks, the formidable warrior class who now reigned supreme. You might imagine them as a unified, monolithic force, but this was far from the truth. The Bahri Mamluks, who had dealt the final blow to the Crusaders, were themselves a delicate balance of factions, often engaged in fierce rivalries for succession and influence. Their very structure, a slave soldier elite, meant that loyalty was often personal and fleeting, creating a constant undercurrent of intrigue and potential rebellion that you would have to navigate if you were a local ruler. For you, living in the Holy Land under Mamluk rule, The world was not necessarily a haven of peace. Raids by Bedouin tribes were common. Local rebellions simmered beneath the surface, and the Mamluks themselves, in their quest to solidify power and prevent any future Crusader incursions, embarked on devastating campaigns. Cities like Caesarea and Arsuf were systematically dismantled to prevent their reuse by future invaders, leaving you to witness the deliberate erasure of history, the meticulous destruction of fortifications built over centuries. This was not merely victory, it was a scorched earth policy designed to reshape the very geography of power. But the Mamluks were not the only empire with an eye on the Levant. Cast your gaze eastward, beyond the Mesopotamian plains, and you will see the looming shadow of another, equally formidable power, the Mongol Ilkhanate. Descendants of Genghis Khan, these rulers held vast territories stretching from Persia to Anatolia, and their ambitions did not stop there. You would feel their presence like a storm gathering on the horizon, a constant existential threat to Mamluk dominance, promising renewed conflict and further upheaval for the weary inhabitants of the Holy Land. The Ilkhanate, unlike the distant European powers, was a very real, tangible menace to Mamluk control. For decades leading up to and immediately following Acre's fall, the Mongols launched several devastating invasions into the Levant. Imagine yourself a villager, caught between the Mamluk garrisons and the terrifying swift advance of the Mongol hordes. You would witness the brutality of their campaigns, the massacres, the destruction, the burning villages, and the forced migrations. These were not minor skirmishes. They were full-scale imperial contests for regional hegemony, battles that could, and often did, determine the fate of entire populations. What you might not realize is the intricate dance of diplomacy and betrayal that characterized the Ilkhanate's relationship with the Mamluks. The Mongols, surprisingly, often sought alliances with European powers, hoping to rekindle the Crusader spirit as a pincer movement against their common Mamluk foe. You would hear whispers of Mongol envoys traveling to European courts, proposing grand campaigns to reclaim Jerusalem, promises that kept the hope of a renewed crusade flickering, even as the reality on the ground grew ever more complex and brutal. These were not the simple narratives of good versus evil. They were desperate gambits in a high-stakes game of imperial ambition. So, while you might think the Fall of Acre meant the end of large-scale military engagements, think again. The Mamluk-Ilkhanate Wars continued, a bloody, protracted struggle that frequently spilled into the Holy Land. You would see armies marching, fortifications being repaired and then destroyed again, supply lines stretching across vast deserts. These conflicts, though often overshadowed by the earlier Crusades in popular memory, were no less significant, shaping the demographic, economic, and political landscape for generations. The air you breathed in the Holy Land was still thick with the scent of tension and impending battle. Beyond these two giants, the Mamluks and the Ilkhanate, existed a mosaic of local powers, communities, and enduring influences. The true unseen empire. You would find resilient Christian communities, like the Maronites and other Eastern Christian sects, who had lived in the region for centuries, long before the Crusaders arrived. They navigated the shifting tides of power with remarkable adaptability, often forming their own local strongholds in mountainous regions, maintaining their unique cultures and faiths under various overlords. Their survival strategies, their intricate local alliances, were a testament to an enduring spirit that history often overlooks. Consider also the Druze, a distinct ethno-religious group concentrated in the mountains of Lebanon and Syria. You would observe their fierce independence, their strategic use of rugged terrain to resist outside control, whether from Crusaders, Mamluks, or Mongols. Their communities, often isolated and self-sufficient, formed pockets of alternative power, capable of fielding their own fighters and shaping local politics in ways that defied easy categorization by imperial powers. They were not mere subjects. They were active, sometimes defiant, participants in the complex tapestry of the Holy Land? And what of the lingering, perhaps more subtle influences of those who had supposedly departed? You might hear tales of former Crusader families, those who had converted or assimilated, their descendants still holding lands or influence in certain areas. Or consider the enduring networks of merchants, regardless of faith, who continued to ply the ancient trade routes that snaked through the Levant. These economic arteries, the flow of goods, ideas, and people, formed an invisible yet potent force, connecting the Holy Land to the wider world and ensuring its continued strategic value for all who sought to control it. This was an economic empire that no army could conquer. What about the whispers of secret societies, like remnants of the Knights Templar or other clandestine orders? While direct evidence of a significant organized Templar presence post-Acre is scarce, the legends persisted. You would certainly find communities clinging to symbols, traditions, or even hidden caches of wealth that might hint at a deeper, more enduring, and deliberately concealed presence. The allure of the unknown, the belief in an underground network working in the shadows, would undoubtedly fuel rumors and paranoia amongst both rulers and populace, making the unseen empire feel very real indeed. The cultural and economic reverberations of Acre's fall were profound, yet often go unexamined. You would witness a shift in trade routes as European merchants, no longer able to operate freely from Crusader ports, sought new avenues. Venetian and Genoese trading posts shifted, establishing new footholds in Mamluk-controlled territories or seeking alternatives in Cyprus and other Mediterranean islands. This dynamic recalibration of commerce meant that while the political landscape changed, the economic lifeblood of the region continued to flow, albeit through different veins. The Holy Land, even without the Crusader states, remained a crucible of cultures. You would encounter a rich blend of Arabic, Syriac, Armenian, and even lingering European influences, particularly in port cities. The intellectual exchange, the architectural styles, the culinary traditions, all bore the marks of centuries of interaction, conflict, and coexistence. This cultural synthesis was an unseen empire of its own, an indelible legacy that transcended political boundaries and military victories, woven into the very fabric of daily life. Moreover, the Holy Land's status as a religious center for Christians, Muslims, and Jews meant that pilgrimages, though sometimes restricted, never truly ceased. You would still see devout individuals making arduous journeys to sacred sites, ensuring that the region remained connected to global networks of faith. This constant influx of pilgrims and their associated economies, guides, hostels, merchants of religious artifacts, created another layer of enduring activity that no empire, seen or unseen, could completely control or erase. Ultimately, what you discover when you peer beyond the Fall of Acre is not an empty stage, but a crowded one, pulsating with diverse ambitions and enduring struggles. The idea of an unseen empire isn't about a single hidden entity, but rather the intricate, interconnected web of forgotten conflicts, resilient local powers, persistent economic networks, and cultural legacies that continued to define the Holy Land. It's the empire of complexities, the enduring power of local realities against the backdrop of grand imperial designs. This period, often relegated to a footnote, was crucial in laying the groundwork for future developments in the region. You will come to understand how the Mamluk consolidation of power, often brutal, created a stable but heavily militarized state that would resist external threats for centuries. You will see how the continuous pressure from the Ilkhanate shaped Mamluk military and diplomatic strategies, hardening their resolve and defining their boundaries. The internal struggles within the Mamluk Sultanate itself, often fueled by rival factions and ambitious emirs, remind you that even the victors were not immune to the relentless grind of power politics. These were conflicts that, while not involving Crusader knights, were every bit as impactful for the populations of the Holy Land, dictating their daily lives, their taxation, and their prospects for peace or turmoil. You would learn to navigate these shifting loyalties, understanding that survival often depended on foresight and adaptability. So the next time you reflect on the Crusades, remember that the story doesn't end with a fallen city. It simply branches, weaving into countless other tales of ambition, resilience, and survival. The unseen empire of the Holy Land post-Acre is a testament to history's persistent refusal to fit into neat, convenient boxes. It's a challenge to your assumptions, an invitation to delve deeper into the unwritten chapters. You have now glimpsed a Holy Land far more nuanced, far more turbulent, and far more fascinating than the conventional narratives suggest. You've journeyed beyond the familiar battlefields, into the heart of ongoing conflicts, economic shifts, and the quiet persistence of diverse communities. This era, overshadowed by the Grand Crusader epics, holds its own profound lessons about power, identity, and the relentless march of history. You have now glimpsed a Holy Land far more nuanced, far more turbulent, and far more fascinating than the conventional narratives suggest. You've journeyed beyond the familiar battlefields, into the heart of ongoing conflicts, economic shifts, and the quiet persistence of diverse communities. This era, overshadowed by the Grand Crusader epics, holds its own profound lessons about power, identity, and the relentless march of history. But the journey of discovery is far from over. There are countless other unseen empires waiting to be unearthed, and we can only do it together. If you believe history deserves to be truly explored, not just recited, then join our expedition. Hit that like button to fuel our research. Subscribe to the Medieval Times Uncharted channel so you never miss a revelation, and follow us to become a true co-explorer of the forgotten past.